All right, just waiting for the stream to connect. Okay, looks good. So back with another session of live coding for making our GitHub plugin for Pinegrow so that we can control GitHub and versioning from directly within Pinegrow. Again, we're continuing with this experiment with live coding. So one of the things that I find is that I'm actually most productive and my brain is firing about code the most when other members of my family are still asleep. So this is a bit of a struggle. And I also don't think that my wife terribly appreciates me live coding because it means she kind of has to be a little more quiet and things like that because I don't have a dedicated area where I film. But nonetheless, we're going to keep the experiment going a little while longer. So in the last tutorial, if I remember correctly, we started adding in our two event handlers for adding our stage changes and commit changes elements to the menu on project load, and then removing those on project code. We also just added in two functions that we didn't do anything with: add initial listeners and add initial and add additional listeners. And we're going to populate these at some point so that when people select the different menu items, there's click listeners that fire different functions. So what I want to try and do today is go ahead and put together a the modal that's going to pop up with when somebody clicks on the settings menu item, and I also and then add that to the page. So I'm going to actually put the modal together in Pinegrow. So the first thing I want to do is I just want to create a new branch for this. So again, we click down on our GitHub branch down here, tutorial 4a, which we were on last time. And we're going to say create a new branch. We'll name it tutorial 5. Okay, so now we're on our new branch, so when we push things up, it won't overwrite our old branch. So this isn't necessarily the way I would use GitHub normally. This is more for the purposes of this tutorial. Normally, I would be pulling all those branches back into the main one. Actually, I could probably still do that, but for right now, I just want to keep everything as separate branches until we get a little bit farther in. All right, so like I said, I want to design the modal in Pinegrow. So I'm just going to drop over into Pinegrow here. And let's go ahead and start a new page or project. So we're going to start it in Bootstrap 4 because the main page of Pinegrow is in Bootstrap 4. I believe it might be in 3, but I think it's in 4. And we're just going to pick the index.html. Okay, so now we have this. Let's go ahead and open that up. So to simplify my life, I don't think within the components that there's any oh, there is. So we're going to grab that modal and let's go ahead and I guess there's no reason not to bring one of versus the other. You know what? Let's use this one right here. Okay, so now we have this modal up here. So we just got to make a few changes. So instead of new message, we're just going to say settings. No. Why is it not letting me do that? Fine, we'll edit it over here. username, and we'll say so remember last time in the last video we talked about how you can get your personal account token from GitHub under your dev settings. Do we want this to be a text area or do we want this just to be an input? I think we just want this to be an input. Actually, that was a dumb way to do that. So let's right click on this and we're gonna change text area to an input. All right, so now we've got our, for some reason it's giving me an error on this. Tag must be paired. That's weird. I don't know why it's saying that, but at any point I think we're fine. So now if we go back over, take a look at our modal, why is it giving me a problem with this? Oh, because inputs are self-closing. There we go. The only thing that I'm thinking is that I'm not sure that I like the IDs here. So let's maybe change those. So let's see. We've got our modal. Instead of saying example modal, we're going to change this over to our settings modal. And then settings modal label. Header title, settings. I could be doing this over in Visual Studio Code and would maybe make this a little bit easier, but okay, so we got the title, then we've got the dismissal button here, the body, label for recipient name. Let's change this to username. And then count token. Actually, let's change that. Change that to GitHub token. This isn't really a password, so I'm not gonna give this like a password thing to make it encoded while we type it in. So that looks pretty good except for the buttons. So let's add another button. And then for that button, we're going to say clear settings. Let's actually move the close button below. Instead of having it be a close button, we're going to say cancel. And then instead of save message, or send message, we're going to say, okay, so now we've got our modal set up. For right now, the only settings that we're going to have are username and personal account token. later on we can see if there's going to be something else we want to add here. So the only other thing that I think I want to do is we're going to get rid of this because it's not a data dismiss. We're going to give this, I guess, an ID. I like to add my IDs right after the type. So we're going to just add an ID of make sure we don't GitHub clear settings. And then for the save settings, we're going to set an ID of GitHub save settings. And then we're going to leave this one as the modal dismiss. And basically it'll just exit out without either saving or clearing the values. Okay, so I think that looks pretty good. So the next thing we want to do is actually save just this inner part here. Actually, we might want to, well, it's not in the container, is it? Just want to save this inner part here as our modal. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to copy this, and then we're going to go back over into our Visual Studio Code here, and then within this panel we're just going to create a new file, paste that in. Okay, so now we have our new modal as an HTML fragment. So now what we have to do is we have to be able to load this fragment in and then place it onto our page within Pinegrow. So save that. Let's go ahead and make a commit of this right now. So we're just going to stage this. Then we're going to enter our commit message. Adds the modal HTML fragment. Enter that in, and let's go ahead and push that up to the cloud, or up to GitHub. Go ahead and create a pull request. All right, so now that's loaded in. So now we have to get this onto our page. And so what we're going to do is we will go ahead and add in a new function to go ahead and add that in. So we'll just add it right here. Really doesn't matter where we add it. The one thing that I always kind of debate is whether or not to add my all of my different functions in within this internal function of the framework, or to add it in the outer anonymous function. It'll work either way. So you can either add them in here as variables, or add them in after you close out that that internal one as just a plain function here. I kind of feel like I don't know. I don't know if it makes a difference. I'm not sure with the structure of the JavaScript structure if it makes sense to add it one place versus another. All right. So just comment on it. Function to add. So function to add settings modal to the page. And so we'll just go ahead and again add the settings modal, and I could use an arrow function here, but I'm just going to do it a little bit more transparently. So add settings modal. So basically, we're going to want to add this settings modal. Since setting the settings, if we look back here in Pinegrow, the settings is there even without a project loaded in. So we're going to want to add that right away. Let's actually add it before the initial listeners. And we probably want to do that because we want to make sure that that settings code is there before we try and add a listener that the user can potentially click to get to it. So we're just going to say add, oops, settings modal. All right, so we're just going to be able to call it there. Now if we go back, start entering our code. So let's see. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is create a new element on the page. So let modal div equal document, and then create a div. Let's give that div an ID so we can easily access it. So to do that, we just say modal div dot attributes. No. Set an attribute ID and just say. Actually, let's look back over here. What did I call this? Settings modal. So let's change this to settings modal container. All right, because we want the ID, of course, to be unique. So now, once we have that, once we've created that, we can now add it onto our page. So in order to do that, we have to actually get our page. So if we look, go back over to Pinegrow here, open up the dev tools. So if we actually look at the Pinegrow main page, that body of the page, remember Pinegrow is just basically a web page that we're working within, that has an ID of PG app. So now if we go back over to code, so we can say that can just get that element by ID. And pass in that PG app. So now that's going to be the app is going to be equal to our entire page. And now all we have to do is just append our new element. So we can just say the app append child and say modal div. Okay, so now we've got that. We've got basically a placeholder for putting our modal setting, our settings modal onto the page. And then, so the next thing we need to do is we need to actually grab a hold of that, grab a hold of the file that we just saved, the modal.html file, and then add it onto the page. So ways to do this. So the best way to do this is going to be first getting the location. So we're going to say let modal file, modal file Oops. And we're going to use a built-in Pinegrow function to basically files get passed around within NWJS basically as URLs, and so we need to sort of get the file pathway from a URL. And in order to do that, we actually need to pass in the framework base base pathway, and then add to it the actual file name. So I'm just going to call this frame base. And then the frame base isn't going to return a trailing slash, so we need to add the slash. And so now we need to define that frame base. So we're going to say frame base. Actually use a constant here since that's never going to change. Doesn't really matter since we're within a function, but nonetheless, constant frame base is going to be equal to framework dot get base URL. I am getting all sorts of weird error messages over here in my streaming, and it's confusing me because I've got everything set up the way I normally do, but it's very distracting. Okay, but I think everything's still streaming out nicely, so I don't think we're going to have to worry. All right, so now that we've defined where we get our file from, we can now go ahead and load that file in. So into the page. So we're gonna get that modal div, I guess. Do I have to do this? Yeah, I think I do. I have to capture it off the page again. Document. I don't know. Maybe there was a shorter way I could have done this so that I didn't have to refetch this. But so again, we added a div with an ID of settings modal container to the page. So now we're just getting that again. And then we can set that element. Now let's be better about this. The inner HTML. And so now in order, what we need to do now is we need to load this file and pass it into the inner HTML. And so to do that, we're actually going to have to use some Node.js, namely use the file system and the read file in order to get it. The other thing that's important here is it's going to take a little while to read that file, and so what we're going to do is we're going to add in some async await in order to make sure that we can grab that in time. So in this case, we're going to have to do an await here, and we're going to pass in a new function. and to that function we're going to pass our actual file that we want to get. So modal file. So I think this is a good way to do it rather than actually doing the fetch within this, because I'm not sure, but probably for some of our other things like adding commit message, I just think there's going to be some more modals that we're going to want to add to the page, and rather than build the file reading into this function, I think it'd be better if we separate that activity, that functionality out into a separate function that we can then call multiple times for the other ones. So because this is now in await, we have to make sure that this is an asynchronous function. So async, and basically this, again, all this is going to do is it's going to make sure that we finish reading this file before we set that inner HTML. So let's see, this is going to be a kind of high level function. So let's go ahead and put it further up here, since multiple things are going to refer to it. So in this case, we're going to say var fetch fragment and this is also going to be asynchronous. And then in this case, we're going to want to pass in where the HTML is coming from. So HTML location. All right. And then, so within Node, there's actually, within Pinegrow, there's a couple of different Node modules. So there's the basic Node modules for reading files. There's also an extended one that's called fs-extra, which wraps some things in promises and makes certain things that normally wouldn't be asynchronous, or certain things that were asynchronous, synchronous. In this case, I don't think we need that. So basically, I'm just going to bring in the regular one. It's not going to change. I'm going to bring it in as fs. We're just going to require it. And just, maybe I'll just quickly pull this up for the heck of it. Go over here, grab new file window. So again, just to remind people, if you ever want to explore and figure out a certain function or whether or not you can do something with Pinegrow, one of the really cool things to do is go ahead and open that package up, and then drag under the resources, drag the app.nw into some sort of code IDE like Visual Studio Code. And so now in this case, I just want to point out, if we look here, we've got our node modules. We go ahead and open that up. Still doing okay. And you can see there's a whole bunch of different node modules, accepts, fs-extra, the one that I was just talking about. Another good one that it has that I make use of is no, I don't. Oh, here it is, post CSS. That's a really useful one to tag into if you want to do things like minify your CSS or remove out different code, different unused CSS, for example. You can do a bunch of stuff with that one. All right, so just to let people know that that's there. All All right, so we're requiring our that FS. So right now we're going to do an asynchronous capture of that file. But the other thing that I want to do is I want to make sure that if for some reason we can't access that file, that we throw an error. I think the best way to do that is to wrap this in a try catch. So, okay. So we're just going to say try, and then read that file, and then if it doesn't work out, we want to catch the error, and then we'll just console it. All right. Okay, so now we've got some error functionality going on there. So what do we put into our try? So in this case, we're just going to directly return the file. So we'll just say return, and then again, this is asynchronous. We want to not return until we've read the whole file. And then we just want to use that FS file system. Actually, we want to read the file synchronously. And then the file that we want to read is the HTML that got passed in. And then we have to tell it what the encoding is. And in this case, it's UTF-8. Whoops. All right. So that should now grab our modal.html file that we did, and then pass it back here, and then our modal container will get the inner HTML set. So let's see if that all worked out as hoped. So back over to Pinegrow. I guess we don't need to save this. Do we want to save this? You know, let's go ahead and save it. Let's just save it as index. I guess that's fine. So I'm just going to put it in there in case we want to go back and alter this design later. No, we don't want to open it as a project. So now let's unload the old one. Let's go ahead and load the new one in. So this should be the correct modal HTML index. Yes. So let's go ahead and load that in. Let's see if we've got any errors. Close. Let's file. Close all files. And let's go ahead and reload Pinegrow to bring in our changed code. So we get our code window, that's good. This is just for people who haven't been doing programming with Pinegrow, and they see this, they panic, they think there's some kind of error that they have to worry about. This is actually sort of an internal Pinegrow developer file. It just helps for the Pinegrow developers it's just some extra styling to be able to see certain things. So don't worry about that error. So right now it looks like we are good as far as our GitHub menu. If we go back to the console, inspect, and scroll down, we can see indeed our settings modal container is there. and it actually looks like it's all there. Header, body, footer. Okay, so now the only thing we have to do is we have to set a click listener to show this modal, the settings modal container. So if we look at Bootstrap, so let's go ahead and pull this over. So in Bootstrap, so they are using this data target example modal. So I think let's see if they have via JavaScript. So show modal when initialized. Call a modal with a single line of JavaScript. Keyboard fonts, modal toggle. Okay, so I guess we just have to do a .modal show. I hate having to do this by jQuery. Let's instead grab that by ID and do a .modal show. All right, so go back over here into Visual Studio Code, and we had to add the initial listener. So the first listener we're going to do is for the settings, and so all we're going to do is we're going to say element by ID, and so we gave an ID of gh-settings. Let's add some comments in here since we're going to have three different listeners, or three different, listeners. Settings menu item. Okay, so now we got the item. Then what? Why are you doing that? I keep getting little fluctuations in my stream or something like that. I hope it doesn't. I'm not sure what it's going to end up looking like. Menu item. And click, add a function, and again from the Bootstrap we just have to pass in the modal ID and then .modal show. So I'm thinking we want this actual ID here of settings modal. So on that we're going to say, do we have to, let's just chain it. Let's not bother defining a variable since we're not going to reference it again. So we can just say document dot get element by ID, and then settings modal. And once we get that, we're just going to pass that into the Bootstrap modal and say show. All right. Let's give that a try. Go ahead and restart this. Uh-oh. Oops. Settings menu lem. That was a typo. Settings menu item. There we go. Jeez. I really have to start staring at the screen instead of my fingers a little bit more, because that was some really dumb errors right there. All right, we reload. And we still have an error. It doesn't like using .on. Can I do this? Is that the best way to do that? So just quickly looking up. Okay. So I was doing it a dumb way. So just looking, I think I'm trying to work wean myself off of jQuery. I'm trying to work with just pure vanilla JavaScript, and so sometimes I sort of get the two things tangled together. Although I think that should have worked. But anyway, I'm going to say here. Okay, let's see if it likes that. Okay, so this time it didn't throw an error. If we look down at the bottom, our settings modal container is loaded in. So now if we go up to GitHub, we click on settings, we get nothing. So what does our... So get element by .modal is not a function. So I'm wondering if Bootstrap demands that it be passed in as a jQuery object. So basically it's saying to us, I don't care that you want to use plain vanilla JavaScript, you need to use jQuery. So this requirement I'm almost certain this requirement will have gone away by Bootstrap 5. But again, Pinegrow is in an older version of Bootstrap, and until the whole thing is redone to work on Bootstrap 5, we still have to go by the older version. All right, so it doesn't like this, so instead what we're going to have to do... Oops, that was dumb. Yeah, that works. So let's see if that works, if we pass it in now as a jQuery object. Okay. And so now we can put whatever we want in here. Cancel should close it out. You know what? I was just looking at that. I'm not sure why this dismissal has dropped down below there. So these, of course, aren't going to work because we haven't added any click listeners to those yet. It's kind of interesting that I didn't realize it would save those in, because here when I cancel out, when I close that and then reopen, it saves those form elements. So that's kind of cool. So we're going to have to change this. Let's go ahead and cancel out of this. Let's open this up. So here, I'm guessing it's just because we don't really have any styling, maybe? Looks like the styling is quite different on our modal. Let's go ahead and pull that inspector window up. I guess we can just look right in here. Go ahead. Modal title 750. And if we look at the, trying to decide what the best way to do this, let's make this smaller for right now. That is not what I meant to do. Oh, for heavens. I'm going to have to quit out of Pinegrow, and where the heck did my Pinegrow window go? I don't know where it went. Alright, fine. Wow. I think I just locked up my computer. There must be an error in the window that is hidden. That is so bizarre. I do not know where that damn window has gone. Ah, there we go. Okay, restart Pinegrow. So now we can see both the DOM tools so now with that selected, we can look at the styling, show the bootstrap rules. So modal title, margin bottom and line height. So if we scroll down here to our settings modal container, open this up, modal header, so modal title. So should have a margin bottom 0, line height 1.5, so that comes over in here just fine. Actual H5 has a font size, but there's also a font size set here on the modal title rule. Where is that? Huh. Huh. Not quite sure why. Not quite sure where that extra font weights. Oh, so it's in some extra edit theme gray CSS. Okay, so it's actually in coming from Pinegrow itself. So we're going to have to add in some styling at some point to get that looking correct. That is really bizarre. What does, if I... crap. All right. We'll have to think about this one. We'll have to come back to the styling on that in order to get that to look correct. No, when I select it here, it looks okay. Must be something to do with when it's hidden, it goes away. Not sure about this. Why this is creating a problem here. So the close, float right, 21 bold and 1. 21 bold and 1. So close, actually I was on the span, right? Button close, okay. Now let's go back up. So let's see, modal header close, button close. Close, float right. Font size, presumably this is correct, 1.5 rem. Font weight 700, line height 1. That looks all pretty good. Just if we look at the computed, what's the display? Display is inline. This is, which one are we on right now? So the display there is inline. What is the display for this guy? Display block for the button, display inline for the span. Let's open our thing up again. So display inline for the span, display block. Huh. All right, I'm gonna have to fuss with that a little bit to figure that out. All right, so just going back over to our code once again. I think I'm just gonna maybe, where's my, do we want to add something else in? So where do we want to do this? Where do we want to do this? All right, so the next thing that we need to do is we need to actually set click listeners for these buttons to actually have them do something. The other thing that we have to do is I'm not sure. So I guess as long as we have a as long as we don't close out our session, whatever we type in here, unless we actively clear it out, is going to still stay in there. But one thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to check to see if a particular project has settings, and we're going to have to load those particular settings in to this box. So I'm pretty sure that if I was to quit this, that those two would go away. So let's just close that out. Let's reload Pinegrow. So settings, yeah, it's going to clear those out. So we're also going to have to, for each project, load those back in. And I was just thinking, originally, I was thinking, oh, we can just save this off to local storage. But I think the only problem with that is if for some reason you want to have multiple people working from the same computer on different projects, we don't want to cross-load. I wonder if that's ever going to happen. We don't want. I guess we need to figure out if we need to save our username and personal account token in a project-specific manner. I think we do. So, not quite sure how I want to do that, because like I said before, basically what I was going to do is save those in local storage and retrieve them from local storage. But I'm wondering if we have to generate something project specific. The only problem with that is if we have a really long project name, we don't really want to save that as a local storage variable, I don't think. I guess we can save. Can you save arrays into local storage? Let's find out. Okay, we can. We can save it as JSON. So now the only question is, what do we need to do? How do we define the actual project itself? So basically create some sort of project name that we can prefix our variables. All right, I think I'm going to think about that for a little while. Let's just go ahead and why do we have so many things changed here? Oh, because we added in our other index that brought over with it some of these other JS resources. So yeah, let's just go ahead and stage it all. So what did we do? We added, so the first one we added the modal file in. So this is going to add. I guess that's good. And so now I'm just going to hit command return. That will then say, do we want to stage all of these? And I'll just say yes. And we're going to push it up. Okay, so that is it for this session of coding. I think it went along fairly well. So again, next time we're going to at least figure out how to save our settings, our username and account token, to local session variables, and maybe we'll start adding click listeners for these other two, the create new repo and clone existing repo. Those are going to be pretty complex functions. We're going to be relying a lot on, again, the node file functions out of probably in this next time fs extra in order to create new directories on the user's computer and or to make our first real API request through the OctaKit to either create that repo or to get an existing repo. Yeah, and I think that's it. So I just wanted to remind everybody, I should have said this up at the beginning, I work for Pinegrow. This is not an official Pinegrow stream and coding. This is just my own personal coding going on here. If you have any questions, make a comment on the video. Please subscribe. Feel free to shoot me some kind of message over on the Pinegrow forum, or make comment within the GitHub repo. I've put a link to the GitHub repo in the video description. So thanks a lot for watching.